Dear learners, I welcome you once again in the second video of chapter number 3, uh, the challenge of development, class 12th political science. Children, in this second video, we'll be discussing that what were the major outcomes of the planning. So first and foremost outcome of the planning was that foundations were established in the early years of planning. For example, you would have seen in the first 5-year plan that agriculture was focused. In second 5-year plan, industry was focused. Likewise, in third 5-year plan, both of these sectors were supported in some or other way through miscellaneous activities, right? I'll say that foundations of planning started taking place in the early years, right? Uh, Secondly, you would see that government campaigns began in the various areas. The major outcome of the planning, especially when we talk of the socialism type of aspect in the early years, as I had told you in the beginning that Nehru had fond of the socialism, various socialist inputs were brought through the planning. One major outcome among them was the land reforms. What was land reforms? Land reforms means there had been working upon some measures upon the redistribution of the land. You know, in Indian society, not only in Indian society, it is not only about Indian society. There can be in any society when there are sections who do hold maximum of the lands, and there are sections who do not have any access to the land or some resource which is productive, is it? So that would be socially unfair. So here, from 1960s especially, government started working upon redistribution of the land. Government brought in late 1960s, around 1970s and all. Government started bringing some of the land reforms, like putting up the upper limit over the land accessibility, and those who are having excess land, government would put a ceiling over the accessibility of the land amount, and excess land would be taken up from such thakurs, jamindars, and this would be distributed to those who are landless. So don't you think this would be a revolutionary idea to bring in the social justice in the society? Okay, because you know, those who are totally landless would not be able to overcome their poverty anywhere. Okay, and if it is to be overcome, that would be through this way only. So many of the land reforms were brought in, especially in late 1970s. So that was a part of planning only, and that somewhere realized that India wanted to end the poverty and wanted to bring in social justice. So that was a remarkable thing. I'll say that this was a major outcome of the land of the independent India. Okay. Now, the another major outcome was the Green Revolution. Before I go to the Green Revolution, okay, I wanted to tell you a particular crisis of 1960s of India, that was food crisis. What was it, and why was it, and then what government responded to, that we'll discuss in the topic of Green Revolution. But first I want to tell you that food crisis in late 1960s, especially 1966 onwards, there had been drought countrywide. There had been the food shortages, especially in the Bihar, Jharkhand, and Bengal area. There had been much starvation, much hunger deaths, and all. Okay, this was partly due to the droughts and partly due to the somewhere due to the zoning policy, somewhere due to the some lack of proper management of the government. Okay, now I have named one thing, that is zoning policy. So what was zoning policy of the government? Zoning policy of the government, that in early 1960s, the country had been divided in the various zone: north zone, south zone, east zone, west zone, and there had been restriction from one zone of supply of some commodities to the another. It was in order to make each zone independent, but somewhere it created problem for those particular states which had been very poor, very critical in terms of agriculture due to the flood or drought or somewhere. So zoning policy created problem for them. There had not been supply of food from the other states, and in that case there had been starvation, there had been hunger deaths. Bihar was hit hard by this in those times. Okay, so this whole duration of 1960, when there had been much droughts, much starvation problem, that particular time was called food crisis. So now how government dealt and how planning provided solution to it. So the major solution to this particular type of food crisis was the green revolution. The man behind green revolution is Dr. M.S. Swaminathan. He suggested that India should try to bring in food sufficiency. Okay, means India shall be independent in its food production. Okay, for that India should follow some particular path. So they framed a particular policy. What was that? India had to create immediate food storage or buffer stock, and that was not possible if some particular areas who are good in fertility, who are having basic facilities of irrigation as well, should be provided immediate help so that they could grow more, and in that case the buffer stock could be maintained. Buffer stock means a certain stock which is meant for providing help in the case of famine or drought or flood to the affected areas. Okay, so with that purpose, with with the purpose of creation buffer stock, some particular areas like Punjab and the western UP, who were good in fertility, who were good in the irrigation facilities in some aspect, were being provided some extra facilities by the government at the subsidized rates. Means farmers were provoked to grow some certain cereal crops. Okay, so Punjab, Haryana, and the western UP regions were being provided cheap rate electricity supply, cheap rate high yielding seeds, cheap rate agricultural inputs, and were motivated to grow the crops. And in that case, when these farmers got support from the government side, they started growing the crops, and that resulted in good production at once, and that resulted in creation of buffer stock for the country, and that especially helped to fight against the food shortages. Okay, so this way food sufficiency was brought in the country. So you will support that it was a very good idea that some of the states were being provided help immediately to create the buffer stock and all, and that resulted in the creation of the buffer stock, and this way we fought against the food shortages and all. That would be really good. Yeah, it was really good, but it had a negative impact also. When some of the states are being provided help and others are being ignored, definitely there would be polarization. Okay, those who are provided help, they would be growing, and those who are neglected would be reduced, would be backward, would be declining. Here especially I want to name some of the states which had been called the ill states. Okay, in the early 80s and 90s. These are Bihar, Jharkhand, and Rajasthan. Rajasthan also, don't get surprised. Rajasthan was also called the ill state, Bimaru Rajya. Ill means Bimar, Hindi word. I have heard this term lot much in my student time, and I was very surprised that why my state is called Bimaru Rajya, because there had been these particular states were drought prone areas. There had been drought year by year, continuous year by year, means 1990s drought, 1991 drought, 92 drought, 93 drought, 94 drought. So that then, due to this particular type of situation, such type of states had been facing extremely food shortages, and they were always dependent on Punjab, Haryana, and western UP for the food supplies. Children, now in 2019 time or 2020 time, you would be observing that Rajasthan is growing very fast because the resources have been identified, industries had been promoted, infra or support has been provided. So states like Rajasthan, states like Bihar, states like Jharkhand also also showed their growth, isn't it? That is. So especially I want to say that green revolution was having one negative impact also, that there had been the polarization type of thing. Some of the states who were getting help, they grew at much faster rate, and those states which had not been provided support, they remained backward. So such type of things should be identified and should be discarded. Every state would be having some or other kind of opportunity. For example, if Punjab and Haryana are having good arable lands, fertile lands,